Are you strategic? The answer can make or break your business. Welcome to Strategic Minds, the podcast where we'll do a deep dive in conversations with extraordinary leaders to learn how they think, plan, and act strategically. I'm your host, Rich Horwath, founder of the Strategic Thinking Institute and author of the book Strategic, and my vision is to teach the world to think strategically. Now, let's explore Strategic Minds.
We're stuck.
What do we do? I have no idea.
You need a new strategy.
We need a more dynamic strategy.
The strategy?
You have to strategize.
But you won't strategize.
Let's talk a little strategy.
Welcome to Strategic Minds. Today on the show, I'm excited to speak with General Robert Brown, a retired four-star general and the current president and CEO of the Association of the United States Army. General Brown is an experienced commander who has led at every level, from platoon through Army Service Component Command. Serving as commanding general of the U.S. Army Pacific, General Brown led the Army's largest service component command, responsible for 106,000 soldiers across the Indo-Pacific region, before his retirement in September 2019, along with serving in many other high-level roles. General Brown, thank you for being on the show.
Thanks, Rich. Great to be here and appreciate it.
So let's begin with your origin story. If you would, please share with us where you grew up and how that environment and the people shaped who you are today.
Well, how much time do we have, right? No, it was. I had a great childhood. I was very fortunate. I was born in Pennsylvania. My father had just gotten out of the Marines. He was a Marine in the Korean War. And so, of course, I heard Semper Fi my whole life and all about the Marines. But we moved around quite a bit. My dad was in business and sales. I ended up my last 3 years in Michigan. And throughout that, I'd really developed a love of basketball. And I practiced and played all the time. And so I became a pretty good basketball player. When I was a senior in Michigan, there was another guy getting all the attention named Earvin Magic Johnson. And he was pretty good. And I remember, you know how you are, your parents always think you're the best. And they'd complain. I'd say, you know, Mom and Dad, he's a pretty good player, you know. And so I used to joke with that. But Magic Johnson decided to go to Michigan State, and so I was not going to Michigan State because I wanted to play in college. But I got a scholarship to the University of Michigan. And I was pretty excited. My sister had gone there, my brother. But then a guy named Coach K came to my house. My last recruiting visit, he talked me into visiting West Point. He was the head coach, Mike Krzyzewski, the head coach at West Point at the time. It was 1977. So I went to visit West Point. Didn't really know what it was. I had never had any interest in the military, but when I on that visit, I just absolutely loved it. The idea of service to others. I remember there was a poster there. It had Patton, MacArthur, Bradley, Eisenhower, and it said at West Point, much of the history we teach was made by those we taught. And I thought, boy, that's just really neat. And so I saw a purpose, and I went back and told Michigan I was headed to West Point. Of course, they came to my house and they're like, "Are you crazy? You're going to be in the Army?" You know, this is right after Vietnam. And they're trying to talk me out of it. But I was dead set, and I was really glad. And I had a very serious girlfriend at the time, too. And so leaving her was not easy, but she was very just tremendous. Said, "Look, if it's meant to work out, it will." She's now my bride, my wife of 43 years. So it worked out, and pretty amazing. But I played basketball at West Point, loved it, and was going to really get out and get into coaching. But well, I'll give the Army a shot. And it was like being on a giant team, you know, and the best team in the world, the soldiers and the military. And I absolutely loved that. And so, yeah, that's kind of the background, how I stumbled into the military. And I think that's quite common. It's very few individuals that from the day they were born knew they want, you know, always wanted to be in the military. It's usually something attracts you to it, and then you end up really liking it because the people are amazing and the mission is so important and satisfying. You know, when you're serving others, it's just really the greatest way to get satisfaction there is, I believe.
Yes. I'd be interested, General Brown, as you went into West Point, obviously it sounds like you grew up with great family values. And then obviously you talked about the leadership at West Point and in the importance of that. I'm wondering, did your values evolve or change significantly as you went through West Point based on where you started out with your family, and then obviously playing for Coach K at West Point. With his leadership, obviously has been talked about quite a bit. How did your values evolve, if at all, from when you were growing up through West Point?
I was very fortunate. I had great, my high school basketball coach, still close with him to this day. He was a wonderful man that really taught me a lot about values and leadership. And of course, my parents and the foundation I had, absolutely, I feel I went into West Point with that foundation. But clearly, I learned, duty, honor, country at West Point, and they really, from day one, are drilling into you, character and how important it is. And then I always say West Point's the best leadership school in the world, but I learned more on the basketball court from Coach K than anywhere else because he was just an amazing leader, incredible, inspirational leader. And so watching him, and I almost didn't realize all that I learned until later. I would go back and say, "Oh, wait a minute, Coach K would do this, would do that," and he had a thing he did with his fist about a team. If you go at somebody like this, you're not going to be effective. But if you go at them as a team, and each finger had a purpose. But I use that for 40 years in the military. There's guys that worked for me 40 years ago say, "Hey, sir, I remember the fist," and being a team and working together. So yes, values strengthened, increased. They do an amazing job at West Point of really day one. It's all about character and values, and so I'm really proud to have had that experience, and then reinforced from an amazing leader on the basketball court where I spent a lot of time. Obviously, I was 4 years, played there, and was captain of the team when I was a senior. So yeah, I learned a lot there as well. Yeah.
Excellent. And I've been a student of strategy for about 30 years now, and in primarily business strategy, but obviously business strategy has its roots in military strategy.
Yeah.
With your wonderful background, I'd love for you to share with us a little bit about how, who are some of the influences from a military strategy perspective on you, when you were in command and as you were growing up through the military. Obviously, you were studying many leaders, both in the United States and historically. Which leaders tended to have an impression or an influence on the way that you led and did strategy?
Yeah, well, I was very fortunate. Had amazing leaders from day one. I had a few that weren't all that great, but that was pretty rare. I was very fortunate to have amazing leaders. My first assignment in the military, there was a young Major George Casey. He would go on to be chief of staff of the Army and an amazing strategist, amazing leader. Later, I would work for a General Ron Griffith, who was just one of the most amazing leaders on the face of the earth, a humble, amazing leader, tremendous strategic thinker. Mm-hmm. So I had those opportunities to work for amazing leaders like that. And then on my own, I studied. I had a love of history that developed early and was really reinforced at West Point. You can learn so much from history. And I'd say for sure, General Dwight Eisenhower, later President Eisenhower, read a lot, everything there is to read about him and studied. And just an amazing leader that was, great at building a team, but then strategic thinker, extraordinaire, amazing how he could simplify the complex. Another one was Omar Bradley. I studied quite a bit. I had the honor of meeting Omar Bradley when I was a senior at West Point. He came to visit, and just an incredible honor to meet him. And he was an incredible thinker and strategist. And I read a lot of books about them and what they did, and studied it. And the problems may have been different later on, but many of the solutions the same way. You look at it strategically and how you assess it, analyze it. And, so I learned a lot from that. And then also from mentors and folks I worked with, watching them solve complex problems helps a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And that complexity, I think, is something that's important from a strategic thinking perspective, to be able to break things down, to analyze. And typically principles can help us. And we'll talk a little bit later about the leadership principles. I'd be interested from a strategy principle perspective. We think of people like Karl von Clausewitz, the Prussian general. One of his principles was there's no higher and simpler law of strategy than that of keeping one's forces concentrated. Were there any principles that you used as you led from a strategy perspective that you kind of kept in the back of your mind to help you develop good strategy and plans for the folks that you were leading?
Yeah, absolutely. Having studied and read a lot of, Clausewitz on war and all that, but then also watching individuals. I think a little more, certainly there's fundamentals there that everyone uses. But for me, I think some of, the vision is so key. And what I saw is, leaders that had that, and the vision wasn't developed by them in a vacuum. This is a vision, you develop a collaboration with a team on a tough problem. Strategy involves tough problems. If it was easy problem, it wouldn't be strategy. Somebody's solving it way before it gets to the higher level, and particularly the highest levels of any organization. You don't get the easy problems. You get the hard ones. By the time it gets to you, they're what we would call wicked problems, a term we use, and there's second and third order effects when you're trying to solve it. There's nothing easy. So assessing, the problem, and I think a principle that is I like to really brainstorm with a larger group and often less experienced individuals in a particular area, not always the most experienced. Some individuals like a smaller group. I like, for example, I would bring in a military problem. I'd bring in a State Department representative, had very little military experience, but a different viewpoint, and often bring in the younger leaders who are not wedded in the way we've always done things. And you have the vision that you give them. We can talk more about how you get to that assessment, and then also there's instinct involved. As the leader, you'll know things that others don't know. You'll be able to see greater input from higher level organizations, greater input from the left and right, and then what's happening down in your organization. And so you get this more complete picture, and it almost goes back to Malcolm Gladwell's Blink. It's and that's an old book, but it's really a great. You'll know the answer before you really know why, and instinct plays a key role. And mention some of those mentors over the years. I was very fortunate in some jobs when I was working for the General Griffith I talked about. I got to talk to General Colin Powell, General Schwarzkopf, General Gordon Sullivan, amazing leaders, amazing. And I would always ask them. I was going into a command after that, the battalion level. It's about 800 to 1,000 soldiers. And I would always say, what advice would you give a future battalion commander? And it was amazing. They all had the same advice. Go with your instincts. Go with your instincts. So I believe that definitely plays in the strategic level. It's certainly operational, tactical level instincts. But it also is there in a major way in strategy. And then crafting that vision. So it gets at sort of taking what Clausewitz talks about and putting it into your organization and division, a principle that then applies. And sometimes that is handed to you. It's fairly easy. Like when I was taking over a corps, there's 4 corps in the Army. It's about 120,000 in a corps. And I took command of First Corps. It was very easy. The President of the United States, President Obama at the time, said, we're going to rebalance to the Pacific. The Chief of Staff of the Army said, Bob, you get out there in the Corps, you're in the Pacific, your job is to rebalance forces from Europe to the emphasis is now the Pacific. Okay, and so you get these tasks and this guidance. That was very easy. As a strategy, I needed a strategy to rebalance to the Pacific. Okay, but that was really the exception of dozens of times I had to develop strategy. That was the only time it was ever handed to me so easily. So usually you have to really assess and look at those instincts of what is it you have to do. And those are key principles. And then crafting that vision that will inspire people to follow. Because everybody wants to know, why are we doing something? From 9 soldiers in a squad at the lowest level of the Army to, the Army itself. Everybody, where are we going? What's our purpose? In every business, it's so important. What's our purpose? And I see it today, young. I have 3 daughters. A few of them are in the business world, and they're kind of, hey, Dad, I don't know what the purpose is of what I'm doing. We're making money. It's about profit, but what's our purpose? And everybody wants a purpose, needs a purpose. There's a lot of hard work to do out there, and so that strategy really helps you with that and moves you towards something the organization needs that really only the top level can give. Yes, you get input from the bottom up, but only the top level can get you in the direction moving towards that strategy.
Yeah, the great principles that you shared there. General Brown. I'd be interested, I know you're teaching new three-star generals, and be interested to understand, as you're looking at these folks, you talked about vision, and that's something I work with CEOs a lot on is, how to craft a vision. And you said, obviously it really comes from the higher levels. Are there any tips or techniques that you could share with our leaders that are listeners around setting vision? You talked about instincts being important, understanding the situation, the purpose. Anything else that you would add to that might be helpful for folks that are actually in that role setting vision?
Yeah, no, thanks. I think setting the vision is one of the most important things. You're creating the future for the organization, and you're leading change with that vision. If it's a good vision and solid vision, the more individuals you can get, the more buy-in in the organization for the vision, the better off you're going to be. And I found that, way back when, 40 years ago, when I was a young leader, I'd be told something I didn't question, whatever. There wasn't as much buy-in needed. We're doing this. You just say, okay, I trust the people. I understand. They know better than me. Okay, we're going to do it. That's totally changed. I mean, yes. And it's just the way the world has changed with information. So your question, I've had, young privates with 6 months in the Army. General, why are we doing this? And I would have been afraid to even talk to a general when I was that young, but it's different. And buy-in is much more important today than it has ever been. And so there's ways in crafting that vision, the more buy-in the more input, although you're developing it at the top, the more input from the entire organization, the better. And that's why I say, I like a larger group, younger leaders input, and then there's some drills and things you can do to get input from below that's very, very helpful. And if you do it right, you have the buy-in before you've even developed a strategy, because they know, hey, they're listening to me, and you get feedback from all the levels you can. You can get out of control and get too much feedback, and you never get it done. But,
right.
As low as you can go in the organization, I commanded one organization, there was about 12,000 people, and, down to about 400 involved in the input, the leaders down to that level. You'd love to get all 12,000, but it never get done, and, too impossible. So, as you're developing that vision, the more buy-in you can get, the better. You've got to also, in that vision, simplify the complex. And I think that is, I've seen great strategies that should have worked, that did not work because it's way too complex. In fact, one organization, I was trying to work with individuals leading it, and it was a very complex problem, and they had a very complex solution and never simplified it enough for the unit. They never really understood. He never got buy-in in that vision. Another commander leader took over and just simplified it, kept about the same vision, and it took off and was incredibly successful. That's one of the toughest things to do, because again, these are complex, wicked problems with second and third order effects. If they could have been solved at a lower level, they would have been. It often really takes a lot of thought, a lot of effort. And then how do you simplify something that's very complex so that, folks can understand it? And oftentimes I found that's maybe in a diagram. You can have a picture is worth 1,000 words. If you can have a picture that shows, hey, here's our strategy. I remember I had that in Iraq. I was commanded about 12,000 as a Striker Brigade commander. We got increased in, and we had, pillars of a building in the foundation, and the strategy was all there on that. And we could, could look at that and you could see, and I would tell them, hey, if we're doing something that's not within the strategy, why are we doing it? There it is right there. Simplified. It was a very complex scenario, very complex situation, but simplified in that vision and in that was everywhere that people could see and understand. So that's really key. Are people understanding it? Another one for vision, and this goes for all of strategies, you've got to develop trust. And trust is the key.
Yes.
And if you don't have trust in the organization, you can have the greatest strategy in the world. It's never going to penetrate the organization. It's never going to lead to change. So you've got to really work on developing trust. And I find a lot of organizations take it for granted that they're building trust when they really haven't done anything to build trust. And the tough thing about trust, you have to work at it every single day as a leader. And you work at it hard. It's almost like you're putting money in the account, and then you're showing them and setting the example. And you can have a few screw ups where maybe you don't have time to explain while you're doing something and
Sure.
just trust me. But if there's too many, you can lose trust. Or if the video doesn't match the audio, you can lose trust in a nanosecond, and then you're not going to get an effective strategy and effective vision without that trust in the organization. It takes a lot of work, a lot of effort, and it sounds easy, but it's very hard. Because it's doing the harder right over the easier wrong oftentimes, and something that it's usually never easy to but you've got to do it, and that gets at that level.
Yeah, I love the tips that you shared there. And I think for our listeners, that idea of that one page with the pillars, the foundation, visually expressing the strategy, I think that's a home run idea, because too often I see companies that have strategic plans that are 60 slide PowerPoint decks or all these big, spreadsheets, or they're sitting in a binder, but they're not really using them to drive what they're doing day in and day out. So I love that.
You're exactly right. Now, I've seen somebody will hand me, here's my strategy, it's 15 pages, and it's like, hey, it's going to fail, right? You might as well start again.
Right.
Can't be 50. Nobody's going to read it but you and a couple of people that work for you that are writing it, most likely, and nobody's going to get the key points in 15
Yes.
pages. If you can't boil it down to one page, one key diagram to simplify it, it's probably not a good strategy.
Right. And General
Yeah.
Brown, I'd be interested. I know you've moved from military commander to president and CEO of the Association of the United States Army. Talk to us a little bit about that transition. And, you talked about the importance of building trust, of setting the vision. Are you following the same techniques that you did as a military commander as you lead that organization? Or have you done anything differently to lead that group?
Definitely have leveraged all that I learned in the military, and we have a strategic plan that we use daily. But it is different. It is, leadership is leadership, whether it's in business, the military, sports. The stakes are different. Lives are at stake in some leadership, first responders, and lives are at stake. But, and maybe it's money at stake in business, whatever. But the principles are the same. But what I found is, although it's the same principles, I have to, in this civilian organization, and fortunate enough, the Army selects a retired four-star to lead the Association of the United States Army, the Army Association for the last 75 years that represents the Army, helps the Army. And so I'm really fortunate in that. But we're about 80% civilian and 20% retired military. So you have to change how you do things. It takes a little longer to do stuff. It takes more explanation, more effort to build the trust, more communication. Much more. I mean, I'd say I communicate. That would happen in the military when there was a crisis. When there's a crisis, you have to over communicate, and it's very similar in a civilian organization. I feel you have to over communicate. It's just they're not used to it. In the military, you get used to it, and you see it all the time, and it's something they do very well in the military at the strategic level, operational and tactical level. What's the purpose? Here's the strategy, and it's something, we can plan anything in the military. It becomes second nature. And it's not normal in the civilian world. I think it's interesting, a lot of companies are hiring ex-military as strategic planners and thinkers, and it's really smart because they are very good at that. And people tend to think, oh, well, in the military, a bunch of robots, they just do what they're told. And nothing could be further from the truth. There's more innovation in the military because lives depend on it. And
Right.
there's going to be innovation, and you better really be good at what you do, because lives depend on it. It's critical. So you over communicate, and it's much slower. I could implement a strategy twice as fast in the military as in a civilian organization. It just is slower, takes a little more time. I found that you build trust in the military, and people would speak up, and you have a learning organization where people were not afraid. They would speak up.
Right.
In civilian organization, there tends to be a little less trust and a little more hesitant to speak up because they're afraid for their job, and they're afraid they might, make their boss look bad, or it's not what the boss wants. And so you use different techniques. Like, I never start off a meeting or trying to brainstorm with, here's what I think. I listen to everybody else first because they're all going to agree with what you say. So it's a little different, but the principles are exactly the same. It just takes a little more time, and you have to, definitely have to emphasize more communication, and it takes longer to build the trust and develop the strategy and then get it implemented. It all takes longer. more time.
Okay. I'd like to tie that to, you mentioned earlier Clausewitz's book on war. In his book on war, he introduces the concept of the fog of war. And I'd like to get your perspectives, General Brown, on that idea of the fog of war. Has that concept, maybe share with our listeners a little bit about what that concept is, how it's evolved over time, and then if that has any influence on what you're trying to do with the Association of the United States Army.
It's amazing. We keep talking about Clausewitz on war, but a long time ago, and he was really amazing strategist and thinker. And I would say, 95% of the principles still apply today, even with the changes in the world, globalization, and the change in technology and how connected we all are. Fog of war has changed, though, and I was fortunate enough to live through that. When I first came in the military, 40 years ago, even up to about my first 10 years in the military, the fog of war was exactly as Clausewitz described. You will never have enough information. And you were lucky when the fog of war was not enough information. And you were lucky if you had 2 or 3 pieces of information. And they used to say, do something, do anything, take the initiative. And it was easier to take the initiative because you were only getting 2 or 3 pieces of info. And you're giving it your best shot, and nobody's going to critique you and say, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? Hey, you had 2 or 3 pieces of info. You did the best you could. You took the initiative. And, of course, you're trying to clarify the fog. You're trying to clear up the fog of war. And it is, you can take, there's something can happen, and people are in 10 different locations, and they will give you 10 different stories of what happened. And oftentimes people see that and they go, oh my gosh, what are they lying? Did they not know what was going on? But it all depends on where you were sitting. And when you're under intense combat situation, intense fire, and your life is at stake, it's very different. It's hard to see. Sometimes people will analyze people made decisions in stressful situations, be it a first responder, a policeman, military in a combat situation, and they'll analyze it like the person had all the time in the world. There was nothing going on. They could clearly think. But when you're getting shot at or your life's in danger, it's a stressful thing. I'll never forget the first time I was in combat, and you're planning, you're working, you're planning, you're leading. How am I going to respond? And I remember that it was the fog of war Clausewitz described. I was getting shot at. It was in the hatch of a combat vehicle called a Striker. It's pinging off the weapon to near me. I'm in the city. I don't know where it's coming from. I'm looking the wrong way. It turns out I had glasses on. They're fogging up. I'm getting ready to shoot over here. It's coming from over there. It's like the fog of war. It's like, holy smokes, this is going on. You're trying to figure it out. You learn. You stay calm. You gotta. You're given instructions and they're listening to you. And so. Fog of war is now that's changed. Not the combat part of it, that's still there, but the not enough information has changed. We saw this happening from about 2000 till the present day, and it happened in the military first. I had a Striker brigade, was the most digitally advanced unit in the Army at the time, 2002, and we could connect anywhere. It was the first time ever in history, all 300 and some of my vehicles. I could see where they were at all times. And I had problems that had never been experienced in combat before in the history of the world. So there'd be an ambush. And in the past, the poor people getting ambushed might be there for hours, days without anybody knowing it. The problem I had was somebody'd get ambushed and everybody could see it on a screen where all the vehicles were. And I'd have 8 people respond, when I only needed 2. But I'd have 8 platoons respond. So it was a good problem to have too many people responding because they could see what was happening. But so information, too much information has become the fog of war. Used to be not enough. Now it's too much. How much do we get? Information do we get every day on our phone, on social media? How do you keep up with it, right? And it's changed some things, quite a few things. So that fog of war, now you've got to look through haystacks of information, thousands of haystacks of information, try to find that golden needle in the haystack that will help you make a decision. And that requires somebody analyzing that information. That requires time. That requires experience. Now we have some things helping us today, like artificial intelligence. Mm-hmm. The key thing it does now is it will help you with that speed of decision. If the algorithm is correct that you put in, garbage in is still garbage out. But you can leverage AI and figure things out that used to take weeks in hours. But it's become the fog of war, too much information. And the folks today that will have the advantage, be it in business, in combat against your adversary, in sports, we're the ones that can take that overwhelming amount of information and make faster decisions from it. They can cull through it faster, understand it better, and make faster decisions, better decisions from it. You'll have a distinct advantage, which you definitely need. And that's what's changed over time. And now also, it changed initiative.
Yeah.
You'll see people now, used to be do something, Dwayne, nobody's going to blame you. Now
Right.
you get folks and they have all this info and they'll do like one of three things. They'll either take all the info in and wait for even more info till they have a perfect answer. Well, usually you can't wait that long. The enemy gets a vote, be it a competitor in business or an enemy shooting at you, they get a vote. And if you're waiting too long, you're never going to have perfect information.
Right.
Okay. Or they disregard the information because they're overwhelmed by it. And I've been in combat with a unit. I go in, on a patrol with a unit, had information, but they were overwhelmed, and they walked right by a roadside bomb and you're like, why didn't you see that? Why didn't you? That's information telling you it's there. They were overwhelmed. They couldn't process. They just disregarded it all. Or the third thing, and what you want, if you train and you prepare people in business, military, sports, again, leadership, you prepare them, cull through the worthless information, find what is valuable, and in a timely manner, and make the decisions, and then you're gonna succeed. You're gonna outmaneuver whatever it is the enemy is you're dealing with in whatever field. So that's kind of how things have changed in that.
Yeah, that's an excellent description. The last part of that reminds me a little bit. Colonel John Boyd from the U.S. Air Force had the OODA loop, the OODA, the Observe, Orient, Decide, Act. You've given us some great examples on, some live combat situations, being able to make decisions. Did you have any principles or any techniques that helped you make good decisions or learn from decisions as you were going throughout your career?
Yeah, I think Boyd was ahead of his time. Air Force Colonel John Boyd, and that OODA loop is a good one. I think that's as good as it gets. Now, a little different ways and observe, orient, decide, and act. A lot of assessment in there, assessing, and the toughest thing often is what are your measures of effectiveness as you're assessing, and sometimes those are hard. Sometimes it's something that takes a lot of time and it's hard to get. Sometimes it's hard to measure events that you prevented, for example, tougher to measure than things that happen and how you reacted. So assessment part of that, I think, is really key. And then I add in that observe, orient, decide, act, the instinct in there.
Yeah.
That's why, a lot of young people today, and I sound like an old guy when I say this, but it's like they almost are like, yeah, what do those leaders know? I could do better. And, I could, maybe I know I'm better with artificial intelligence. I'm better with all this overwhelming amounts of info. I'm better with it. But the experience needs to be there. And, I'm not saying some people couldn't do better, probably, but there needs to be experience here because that experience leads to the instinctive decisions that are so key. And the reason that we'll never have, some people think, well, we'll have robots fighting all these. No, they'll certainly will use autonomous vehicles, autonomous systems, all we can to protect life. But we'll never let a robot decide to shoot or kill someone. There's no way. It's going to have to be a human being because the robots will never have the required judgment, empathy. Now, you can leverage them with a human participating. That gets into that whole instincts of autonomous systems will never have the instinct of what's going on, and they're so key to stay ahead of an adversary, again, in any field. So that instinct part, I think, is a part. Boyd talks about it, but not enough. In my opinion, I'm not critiquing him; he was amazing, but I think I used a little more the assessment and a little more the instinct in that OODA loop. Yeah.
Yeah, something you said there really resonated with me. You talked about experience leading to that instinct. And one of the things I know we've chatted a little bit about beforehand was the after action review, and that being a way to build your insights from experience. For the listeners out there that aren't familiar with after action reviews, I'd be appreciative if you could share a little bit of your perspective on after action reviews, what they are, how you use them, and any tips that you'd have.
Yeah, no, thanks, Rich. After action review is something, again, that the military does extremely well. It's in our culture, and the United States military does it better than any other country. There's some countries, their culture almost won't allow them to do it because
Yes.
it's not culturally acceptable to tell somebody bluntly, you screwed up, you failed.
Yeah.
It just won't do it. So
Right.
we're very fortunate. So it's looking at professional discussion of an event where you focus on standards. The standards are okay. What happened?
Okay.
Why did it happen? And how do we sustain the strengths? There are good things that happen. How do we sustain those strengths? And how do we improve the weaknesses, things we did not do well? And that requires you, and we're very fortunate in the military, all the services, and the Army has combat training centers in the Desert National Training Center in California, in Louisiana, Fort Johnson, and the Joint Readiness Training Center. And then in Europe, they have a Joint Training Center in Grafenweer over there. And these facilities, they have top-notch opposing forces. So you're fighting the best in the world in scrimmages, and then they have observer controllers that watch everything you do and record everything you do, and they have they can prove everything you did right and everything you did wrong. So you pull that into an after action review. And for example, before I deployed to combat, both as a battalion, 800 people, and as a brigade with 5,000 or more, I got to go through the National Training Center and the Joint Readiness Training Center, 2 training centers, twice before going to combat, where you learn and your whole team learns. The after action reviews are the key part. And you don't automatically learn it. You got to get to the point where you actually have an action plan where you get after it. But a key is the culture, and those training centers and the military and the Army in particular has a learning environment culture. You're not going to get fired because you messed something up in that tough situation. In fact, they'll think more of you if you admit what you messed up and why, and you're learning from it. It's that trust we talked about earlier, so key, creating a learning environment where people want to learn, and that after action review helps you learn and overcome those issues that may be buried if you didn't pull them out. And it's like pulling a Band-Aid off. You can't be thin-skinned, and sometimes it's tough. And you'll see units. We still will have units that will go through and they'll try to fight it. No, we didn't do that. But the smart units, the good units, and 90% of the units know that, hey, you can't do everything right. You're going to do the best you can, and then you'll learn from it, and you're better afterwards. And I've seen businesses that have used it, and military and sports that have used it. I mean, coaches do it. Let's face it, when you win a game, you don't learn as much, right? Because you won. When you lose any sport, you're picking apart what happened. We missed this shot. We didn't rebound here. We didn't do this. You're picking it apart. You can't sleep till the next game. But they're really, if they're smart, going through a good after action review. What were the strengths? What we do right? What we do wrong? How are we going to fix that? And it's really important for business as well. And so it's a great technique. It's also certainly used when there's a tragic incident happens, and the AAR will really get at. And of course, then you combine it with experts that may come in, safety experts that give the analysis, so you have the facts there, and that can prevent it ever happening again. I've seen that, and that's what you want. It never happens again. Accidents will happen, sadly, but hopefully you can prevent it or mitigate it as much as possible. Yeah.
Yeah, that's terrific advice. And what you said there, I wrote down, the key is culture. And I think for a lot of the businesses out there, the leaders that are listening, you've got to build, to your point, General Brown, you've got to build the trust in the culture that's going to support that level of transparency, honesty, so that you can get to the real learning. So I love that. I want to build on that with another concept from the military that I think is fascinating and very valuable for business, which is red teaming, where an independent team simulates an enemy or competitor's approach. I know in studying your background that you were kind of a pioneer in this area. Love for you to share with our listeners a little bit about red teaming. How did that start? What were your perspectives, and where do you see the value there?
Yeah, I was very fortunate. When I was a mid-level officer, I saw sort of a technique of red teaming. They didn't call it red team, but it was starting to develop. And so when I was in charge of a striker brigade, about 5,000 I took to combat, we weren't clever enough to come up with red teaming. we use the term devious bastard. It's kind of, don't ask me where we came up with that, but we would, we'd have a plan, and you're working a plan, a lower level strategy it can be a lot higher level,
Sure.
but at that level, we were operational, tactical, working plans. And then we would always pause, and we'd have the devious bastard. Okay, what's the enemy going to do here that we haven't thought of? What's the other perspective? And we would take older, we call them warrant officers. I would use warrant officers. They're a specialist, like a pilot, a maintenance. They're a unique group that has an amazing, they're really smart. They have amazing special skills. But they also are just the culture of that organization. There's an officer, commissioned officers, a non-commissioned officer. The warrant officers are officers, and they're not afraid to tell you. Typical warrant officer will tell you, "Hey, you're messed up. This is stupid." So you take someone that's not afraid to tell you. So I would, use that devious bastard with a thing we call intentional failure. So as the commander, we develop the plan. You're helping shape it, but then you go, okay, time out. Before we go any farther, the plan has failed. Now, why? And you go around to everybody. Everybody gets a chance to say why the plan has failed. So the emperor is exposing himself and saying, "Hey, tell me you have permission. In fact, if you don't tell me, I'm going to be upset with you if there was something you knew and you didn't say it." Again, that culture of trust. Nobody's going to get fired for telling, the colonel in charge that his plan was stupid in this area. Logistically, it's not going to work. It's going to fail, for this reason. So normally what I saw over hundreds of times doing that in real world and combat and so forth, usually be about 5 to 6 things in a plan, maybe a complex plan, 8 to 10 things that someone would bring up of how it would fail. And the devious bastard is the last one to go, of what the enemy would do that we wouldn't think of. And I actually had in combat, we went through that. We had a plan for an operation. And the devious bastard said he thought that Al-Qaeda, in this case, we were fighting in Mosul, Iraq, he thought Al-Qaeda would fire rockets and mortars at Iraqi civilians and then blame the U.S. military, try to make it look like we had done it in the city, that they would do it. And we're all like, oh, my God, who would do that? That's terrible. They've killed innocent people.
Right.
But okay, if they did that, a devious bastard's idea, what they would do, here's how we would respond. We would immediately put out a press release. We'd immediately we do these 8 things to mitigate it. And lo and behold, in this case, we had done this planning. The very next day in the operation, that happened, that exact thing. Wow. And we were able to turn it on Al-Qaeda, and it was obvious that they had done it. And we reacted so quickly, first with the truth of what happened, that backfired on them like crazy. And we had lots of citizens coming forward telling us, other things about Al-Qaeda, and it worked really well. That became red teaming. I mean, and it evolved over time. It was a course taught at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, and a very good course. It's still taught there as an elective. It was a whole course. They had to cut it a little bit. And so it's a great thing for a business. Again, sports, leadership. When you've got a situation, you do the red teaming, and there's actually a course where they can go and learn how to do it. And I let a civilian, Bryce Hoffman, an author, he's written several books. I let him come to the course as a civilian, and then he wrote a book called Red Teaming, if you want to look it up out there. And it's good for business. It kind of talks about how you do it, and for business, how it would work. So it's another thing the military does extremely well and can be very helpful for things. And what's interesting in strategy, one of the principles in strategic level leadership that's changed is expecting to be surprised. It used to be, when I was young in strategy, we kind of could get ahead of everything, and you didn't expect to be surprised. Again, there wasn't much information out there. You could kind of control things better. You weren't surprised often. Well, now with overwhelming amounts of information, that has changed, and now you're going to be surprised. So you have to expect it. Something is going to happen in a strategy to surprise you. Expect it, work through it, and then it's not such a shock, and it doesn't throw you off your strategy. Something's going to happen in today's world. Things move so fast. People are so connected. It can be a tweet that causes it. It can be who knows, and there's so many ways. And so the red teaming helps for when you are surprised. You've red teamed it, and you're going to come up with, you may not come up with the exact thing, but you're going to know principles of what to do, and you won't be off course.
Great advice there, General Brown. I think that's really applicable to a lot of the business leaders out there. I know in some of the strategy workshops I do, we spend a lot of time on thinking about the surprises that could come up. And I think what you shared are some great principles. You were kind enough to share with me before our session today some of your leadership principles, and you've done a really nice job of keeping those simple, taking the complexity out, some of the basic things that you've groomed over the years in your commands, and now as the Association of the United States Army President and CEO. I'd be appreciative if you could share with our listeners a little bit about your leadership principles, and what are some of those things that you found successful in leading people.
I'll give you a funny story to start that.
Yeah.
So my oldest daughter serves in the Army. She's a lieutenant colonel. I'm really proud of her. But way back when she was a great runner in college. She ran at North Carolina State, and she did ROTC. And so for 4 years in ROTC, she never really. I was in a busy job. I was commanding that Stryker Brigade. I was in Iraq. I was deployed a lot, gone a lot.
Yeah.
But she never really talked to me about leadership. But she graduated, commissioned, and she's about to take her platoon. The night before she takes a platoon of 32 soldiers, and I get this frantic email. I'm in Iraq. It says, Dad, give me the secrets to leadership. Here it is, night before. Like, I'm going to tell her here are the secret keys. Here you go. Here's
Right.
3 things, and just do this, and you're good.
Right.
And so I told her some of my leadership principles that trust is the first one. Building trust is critical. Right. Absolutely essential. Nowhere is it more important than in the military, because you're trusting each other with your lives. You have to be able to trust. I tell you something, it's got to be accurate. We have to trust. Without trust, you can't get empowerment, which is so important today, empowering. Part of that trust and how you earn it is another leadership principle is caring.
Yes.
How much you care. And, you have to demonstrate. You have to love those you lead like your brother and sister. It sounds easy, but we have a saying, soldiers don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And they don't care, and I see that a lot in business in particular. You have all the credentials, but it's an amazing thing. All of us in any field, from the time we're born, we're evaluating those that lead us. Scout leaders, coaches, teachers, parents. And if you ask anybody who is the best leader you ever worked for, it's usually not the smartest person. It's usually not, it's never the person who was out for themselves and it was obvious. It's always someone that they knew truly cared about them and the team, right? And they demonstrate that. So that's a key principle. And another one is character. Only you can give away your character. And, character is built in the small moments. In fact, this is close to an Eisenhower quote. Character is built in the small moments and manifested in the great ones. That's from Eisenhower. Close. I'm not sure that's the exact quote, but one of the things I learned, you said earlier, from Eisenhower, built in your character is going to be tested constantly. Right. Little things. But you've got to get through. Only you can give your character away, and when you do, you can't get it back. And so it's key. And so I told my daughter these things and a few others, and she's like, "Oh, come on, Dad. You got to be kidding me. That's common sense. It's simple stuff. Right. Come on. I want the keys to, Well, right. So we go fast forward about 3 months, and she gets a hold of me again and says, "Hey, Dad, you were right. This lieutenant, I get to, this lieutenant next to me, his troops know he's only out for himself. He doesn't care, and they won't do anything for him. And, this guy, his character was flawed. This guy didn't build trust. This guy was a tough thing going on. They're going through an obstacle course in the mud, and he didn't want to do that, so he made some excuse. He's on his computer instead of being with his soldiers. It's like, you're right. It's not rocket science, and it really isn't, but it's hard. Don't get me wrong. It's very hard. And so, some of those principles. Another one today that's really is humility. No one would ever, for a leader in the past, they might say empathy, but they would never say humility, because they think, you don't want to be too humble, but it's humility with confidence. So why is that so important today? Gone are the days where a Patton can stand up there and just shut up and do as I say. Over-empowering leader knows it all. Nobody knows it all. And, the principle of it used to be you didn't get enough information, so they tell you, make a decision and don't change your mind, or you're going to appear wishy-washy as a leader. Well, now you make a decision, You're getting 10 more pieces of info every 10 seconds. So you better change your mind, or those that work for you are going to think you're an idiot.
Right.
You know, and so that principle's gone in, and it really gets at, you have to have the humility to know that you don't have all the answers.
Yes.
And I've stood in front of formations, and it takes a more confident leader, by the way, stand in front of others and say, we don't have all the answers. We need every one of you. And I've stood in front of 100,000 and said, we need every one of you. And the best ideas are going to come from the cutting edge, those closest to the problem,
Yep.
The youngest soldier in the formation. And how do you get that to the leadership? And, that's by building that trust, by showing you care and that humility with confidence, and know that you don't have all the answers, and getting to where you can empower, or you're going to be a day late and a dollar short today. So those are just some of the principles. We could talk that for another hour and a half. People would, it'd be a good way to, if they have trouble going to sleep, right?
Well, I love what you shared there, and the idea of love those you lead. I think that's a really powerful one. So a lot of great stuff there. We did touch earlier a little bit on your role now as president and CEO of the Association of the United States Army. Would love to hear just a little bit about what you're doing there to serve members and what that really is about.
Yeah, no, thanks, Rich. I'm very proud because we're an educational nonprofit. And it was formed 75 years ago in 1950 by the Army, because the Army realized there were a lot of people out there, but they needed a voice, and they needed to connect to the community and America, connect the Army with America. So we have 122 chapters all across the United States, Europe, and the Pacific. And those chapters are led by volunteers. And every day they're doing something to help the Army, help soldiers that have financial problems, food insecurity. The chapters are in the community. So they connect the community, and that's both active duty, if they're right next to an active duty base like Fort Campbell. They'll pull the community into the base, because it's hard to get on the bases now. They're secure, and the community is kind of isolated from. So the AUSA chapters bring the community in, and they do events together, and they learn about each other, and they help, and it helps the Army immensely. It brings recruits. It brings assistance where needed. The Army, the children, the families are in the community. They're the fabric of the community. They're teachers, they're kids in the schools. So it links them together. And then we educate folks both within the Army on leadership, and then outside the Army, we're educating folks as well. And then we inform them of what the Army does, and we connect them with the Army. And so it's really a tremendous, and we have 1.8 million members. Wow. Which is really awesome. And so we do also go represent, we go lobby, not with any money, just lobbying. Hey, we want a strong Army. Help us here, help us there. We try to help the Army all we can that way, be a voice for the Army. For example, we do an annual meeting. We'll bring in about 40,000 people. We'll have 700 defense companies there filling the Washington Convention Center. And, typically a service will get 3 or 4 stories in the news a day. During the annual meeting, AUSA annual meeting, there'll be 75 stories a day on the Army. Wow. Almost all of them positive about what the Army's doing. And then it's educational forum where we're sharing the latest and greatest lessons and saving lives by learning and at all levels within the Army. So really proud to be a part of it. And it's a great organization that, again, for me, I was worried I'd missed that sense of purpose I had in the military of selfless service. And I love that, and I have the same sense of purpose.
Well, and thank you. We'll definitely put a link to your association in the show notes.
AUSA.org, and folks can see all that we do and go participate in events. And if they want to join, you can join for free as a member. You can also pay, and you get a little additional benefits. It's kind of so. Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks.
Excellent. And then, General Brown, I'd be grateful if we could finish our conversation with your responses to 6 questions that we call the Strategic 6. Does that work for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be honored. Yeah.
Great. Number 1, what was your first job?
Okay, first job was cutting grass and shoveling snow in Michigan back in the day, for like $5 a lawn and stuff. But first job in the Army was second lieutenant platoon leader, which is an awesome job. When you graduate, you're commissioned as second lieutenant. You have 32 soldiers, and it's just amazing experience. You get really close to them. But yeah, before the Army, it was cutting grass and shoveling snow.
So number 2, what's your favorite vacation spot?
Hawaii. That didn't take but a nanosecond. I learned to surf when I was stationed in Hawaii. I'm no good, but I enjoy it, and I ride old man waves, 3-4 foot waves, and I love it. I got a surfboard that some would say is a small aircraft carrier. It's so large, but it takes me a while to stand up now. But I really love surfing in Hawaii, and it's just a great place, great people, amazing, laid back, wonderful attitude, amazing people, culture. Yeah,
Yes.
easy one.
Excellent. I'm going to be there in a couple of weeks, actually. Number 3, what's the one word that best describes you?
I'd say motivated.
Yeah.
I mean, I just, I feel very lucky. I've always had an energy to motivate others, and I'm motivated myself. Glass is half full kind of person. I feel very fortunate. Got that, I believe, from my mother, and a love of life, and I feel very fortunate for that. Yeah. So I'd say motivated.
Okay. What one book has had a significant impact on your development?
The Bible.
Yeah.
I would say the Bible. The lessons in there, unbelievable. Yeah.
Yeah. As we've talked today, Proverbs 27:17, as iron sharpens iron, so man sharpens his fellow man, comes to mind as I listen to a lot of the wonderful advice that you've shared today.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Number 5, what's the one piece of advice that you'd most like to share with others that might fit on a bumper sticker?
That's another one, goes back to my foundation. My high school coach got me involved in Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and it was a book and a movie that influenced me. So it would be I Am Third. I am third. The Lord is first, my friends are second, and I am third. It's a story about Brian Piccolo and stuff.
Yes.
People might remember. A great book, great movie. It really influenced me as a youngster. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in Chicago, so former Chicago Bear.
Yeah, there you go. Gail Sayers. Yep.
Yep. And number 6, what's the most exhilarating moment you've experienced in your professional life?
I think it's. I was looking for a specific moment. Okay, what's this? But I would say it's providing people the chance at freedom. People that you don't even know, that would never ever have had a chance at freedom. And I was privileged enough to do that in about 4 or 5 different locations. Of be that in peacekeeping, that you're keeping the peace so they have a chance at freedom, or you're removing a tyrant who's an autocrat. Destroying their chance at freedom. So that providing people the chance at freedom, that selfless service, that's the most rewarding and I'd say the most exhilarating thing. And that was little moments here and there and victories, being able to have elections in northern Iraq when they said it wasn't possible, different times. But it's definitely bringing people a chance at freedom. Yeah.
Yeah, that's powerful. Well, General Brown, I really appreciate the wonderful tools, the techniques, the experiences, the stories you've shared with us today to help all of us be a little bit of a better strategic leader. Thank you for your service to our country over these many years, and thank you for being my guest on the show today.
No, it's my honor, and thanks, Rich. Thanks for what you're doing. I wish I'd have known about this earlier. I'd have been listening to you all the time. Thanks for what you're doing, and appreciate the opportunity to be on.
Great, thank you.
What are we talking about? Practice?
Practice makes perfect. Practice makes
Profit.
Jeff Bezos, founder of Amazon, said, as a senior leader, you get paid to make a small number of high-quality decisions. Your job is not to make thousands of decisions every day. In my strategy workshops with executive teams, we often complete an exercise called the decision inventory. This is something you can practice to enhance your decision-making. Create a list of the 10 decisions that occur most often in your business. Then rate the importance of each decision as low, medium, or high. Then identify the current decision maker and ask yourself, is this the right person to be making this decision, or can it be delegated to somebody else? Then identify whether the decision should stay with that person or be moved to someone else. It's a great technique to increase your team's decision velocity and clarify once and for all who owns which decisions.
I appreciate your strategic mind.
Must have a strategic brain.
Great strategic minds of tomorrow right here.
In this segment, The League of Strategic Minds, I answer questions submitted by listeners. Today's question, in your experience, what's the best way to tell if someone is strategic? I've been wrestling with this question for the past 23 years that I've run the Strategic Thinking Institute, because after all, the word strategic is in my company name. Research shows that only about 43% of managers are strategic, meaning they can articulate the strategy that they're using. So that's less than half. So I developed the Strategic Quotient Assessment, or the SQ, which was really a method to measure how people think, plan, and act strategically, looking at both their mindset and behaviors. We've had nearly 4,000 people take the SQs to get their scores, and the average score currently is 71 out of 100. If you have a question you'd like answered, visit the Strategic Minds page on the website strategyskills.com and complete the brief submission form. If your question is selected, you'll receive some strategic swag for your contribution. You can also check out the show notes link to the Strategic Quotient Assessment and learn more there.
Any insights?
You play to win the game.
Any further insights?
You don't play to just play it.
Insightful.
I want winners.
I played the game to win.
I want people that want to win.
It's very insightful.
To close today's show, our Winsight, or idea for advantage, comes from Sun Tzu, the Chinese general and philosopher who wrote, "Do not repeat the tactics which have gained you one victory, but let your methods be regulated by the infinite variety of circumstances." Are you and your team repeating the same tactics year after year and expecting some type of miraculous change? Carve out time to think strategically about the changes in your market and with your customers. Stop procrastinating and start innovating. If your team needs a new process and tools for strategic thinking, lacks a common language for strategy, is too reactive and tactical, or would like to increase innovation to grow profits and create competitive advantage, visit strategyskills.com, where you can learn more about strategy workshops, online certificate courses, the Strategic Thinker newsletter, and hundreds of other resources. Pick up a copy of my newly released book, Strategic, and take your leadership development to the next level by subscribing to the Strategic Fitness System, an innovative, state-of-the-art executive development platform. Remember, be strategic to be your best.